But yeah, I would just did you hear what I asked?
No, 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 I didn't. Let's see.
So I was just asking what like what have you been concerning yourself with when it comes to like philosophy, or if you're doing a lot of stuff with veganism or
Yeah, so basically, the way I got into, so I'll answer two things. The first is philosophy, the second is veganism. So the firstly, I've always been into philosophy. I've always been into, um, existentialism as well, because like ever since I was very young, I grew up agnostic and atheist. So I've always been interested in like religions. I've always been interested in the philosophy behind religion. I've always been into like existentialist philosophy as well. I remember reading Camus in high school and really getting hooked on to absurdism. I quite like Nietzsche as well. I think Kierkegaard is the one existentialist philosopher I'd like to learn more about. Um, then, when it comes to veganism, the way I first got into veganism was, for me, it was more of just a subjective, almost attitude kind of thing I had. So, like for example, because I'm of Indian ancestry, and plenty of people in India are vegetarians, and that's for somewhat ethical reasons. It's to do with ahimsa, nonviolence. You could make that argument. It's kind of ironic because the dairy industry and the egg industry in India, although Indian vegetarians don't usually eat eggs, but the dairy industry in India, at least, works the same way that the dairy industry abroad does. But historically, livestock, although they were being used, were not, treated in the same way as they are in the modern day dairy industries. So that's not really something that really took grounding. So I had a sort of understanding of vegetarianism and veganism, like sort of at the back of my head. But I just grew up I just grew up and I ate a lot of meat when I was younger, and I grew up eating meat. Um, I used to eat pretty much anything I wanted, and I never really thought twice about it. In 2018, I read an article by the socialist Nathan J. Robinson on his website, Current Affairs, on his blog, almost Current Affairs, named Meat and the H Word. The H word is Holocaust. And he basically says, given this mass industrial, jeez, sorry, given like, the nature of this mass industrial slaughter that's happening to animals, why is it unfair to refer to this as a Holocaust? And he talks about the article. He says, animals are conscious, they can feel pain, they matter in the same ways we do. He kind of links it to the Nazi Holocaust as well. um, he says, we don't have to kind of denigrate humans to recognize what's there with animals. And racism kind of has this relation with speciesism, especially if you look at the Holocaust, because one of the things that the Nazis did, and they do this in other genocides as well, is they compare animals to, or they really compare humans to animals the um, to denigrate the human. And what he says is what animal rights activists are actually doing is the opposite. We're comparing animals to humans, or animals to people, if you want to use that word, even to sort of raise the status of the animal. So I think that I thought it was a very valid thing, and that kind of planted my a seed in my head, because I understood if racism is wrong, and if racism uses this kind of speciesist messaging, then I don't know. I didn't even know what speciesism was as a word at the time. Then that's something we need to think about more. But I just kind of stopped thinking about it entirely. But I mean, I had that at the back of my head. That article really horrified me, and I said, yeah, I think eating meat is unethical. Then a while later, um, when I first came to college, and this is how I got into veganism. One of my friends who lived near me, like next door, was a vegetarian. And I remember talking to him, and this was pretty funny because I remember him saying, I'm a vegetarian, but don't worry, I'm not one of those like pushy kinds of vegetarians who would care about what other people ate. And I said, you realize that, like, first off, the people who do those aren't vegans because, they're doing it for an ethical reason. And secondly, like, if I were a vegan, I think it would be, not that you always have to go about it in a bad way, but I think it would just be ridiculous if I was okay with other people, doing something I'm against, consuming
yeah.
animal products, right? Um, I remember saying that, and I said, if I were a vegan, and then later on, I just started thinking, why am I not a vegan, right? Like why am I not one? Because I thought about that article, Then after that, I started watching a bunch of YouTube videos about, because as I said, I was mainly into religion and existentialism, and I found Cosmic Skeptic. I found Cosmic Skeptic's videos, and to be honest, his case for veganism is pretty good. I quite liked it or anything like that, but it was really just sort of seeing this the fact that veganism was like becoming a sort of idea that was respected among skeptics that made me think, like honestly, I have no excuse now because how can I be sitting here talking about um, questioning the public norms and stuff when I'm funding what I had already acquiesced to at that moment being a Holocaust. So after that, I became vegan. Then one of the first things I started doing when I became vegan was asking other people, why aren't you a vegan? Right? Not in an aggressive way, right? More of trying to more of just like being curious with other people because many other people, at least for me, it was just at least I was just weak-willed. I at least intellectually understood what veganism was, and I had that positive attitude towards it. But many other people just didn't understand what veganism was or why animal exploitation was wrong or the nature of animal exploitation or like that we had domesticated animals and that they were in these factory farms. They just didn't really think about it or understand it in a proper way or understand what its actual ethical what its actual ethical repercussions and what its actual ethical and moral significance was, right? Like people just, didn't really understand that. And that's sort of at around the time where I started having to, discuss things with people, debate things with people, and you know, um, it's very weird, isn't it? Because it's only really when it comes to animal ethics that people, even in informal conversation, will immediately start going to like meta ethics. We just don't do this with other topics, right? We
Mm-hmm.
rarely actually, even with like other social or political issues, like for example, abortion, we just don't start talking about like meta ethics. We talk about, we talk mostly just about normative and applied ethics. We just talk about like, oh, is this like pro life? Or is this like pro-choice position consistent with like other attitudes we have towards humans and stuff like that? We talk about that. We don't start saying like, oh, this is like, oh, your claim is like subjectivist, and I don't know if
Well,
I don't
yeah.
know if your statement's an emotivist one or a cognitivist one. That people don't, and people just don't do this with other topics, right? Like when we were saying like, oh my god, it's so horrible what's going on in Afghanistan. We should have gotten out there earlier. I guess like that's a political issue, so we talk more pragmatically. But no one just comes up and says like, "Oh, I'm a moral nihilist."
Well,
And the funny
yeah.
thing is, when I talk to people like this, I started saying everyone's making their own meta ethical claims. Everyone's being a moral relativist. What do morals even mean? And I started thinking at least there must be some concrete like truth value to like meta ethical ideas. And if realism is true, then morality isn't just like your personal opinion. Of course, like and as perspective philosophy says, the entire language with morality and ethics that's completely been butchered as well. So this was around the time I actually started getting into moral philosophy, and that's when I started reading. Um, moral philosophy and watching YouTubers and debating stuff like that. So that's just basically how I got into both veganism and philosophy. That was a long story, but I hope that I
Well,
hope that
no, it
explained
was
everything.
good. I think that is a good point that I haven't actually thought about that much. That when it comes to politics and like social issues that regard humans, meta ethics is never talked about, and that's because there's already the presupposition of human value. When it comes to veganism, oftentimes there's not a presupposition of animal value or non-human animal value, that is, and or oftentimes, yeah, there is animal value is agreed to, but the way in which they are valuable
Yeah,
is what is contested. Like, oh yeah, I do value animals, but I value my taste pleasure more, or I value them, but not to the extent where it would be immoral to kill them if there's minimal
yeah,
suffering
I
and
mean,
such.
yeah,
But
exactly. Most people are welfarists, right? So,
yeah,
like for example, killing an animal to eat them, killing an animal to eat them, well, it seems completely okay to a welfarist, but like torturing an animal for fun wouldn't be. But we just don't do this in a human context, do we? We don't say like,
hmm,
Jeffrey Dahmer was an okay serial killer because he killed the people he ate, but like other serial killers were bad because they did it, right?
yeah, and
Because
they
people have this idea that animals are property, they are things to eat, they are things to wear, and it's all just a matter of how you go about doing that action. We're not discussing the action
yeah.
itself. That's
And
the problem.
a lot of the times they don't actually realize that to their own standards of oh, well, yeah, I'm a welfarist, but the vast majority of the welfarists support the most horrible factory farm conditions on Earth. So they're not even consistent with that if we're talking about their actual like actions. But something I've seen, which is